When you hear the words hot hatch, what comes to mind? For me, I think about all the performance hatchbacks that exist that I can't afford. The reality is, if a popular hatchback exists, then it's subject to the price hikes we've all seen so far. So then, what are we left with? In terms of hot hatches, not a lot, but there might be one vehicle that ticks most of the boxes and is still very affordable. Before I get into the details, please make sure you hit the like button, leave a comment and subscribe if you want to see more content, and I really appreciate it. Now, if you're already subscribed, then you're probably going to guess what car I'm referring to. And before you call me biased, just hear this. Before I made the purchase of this hot hatch, I spent up to 6 months pondering, test driving and researching an array of performance hatchbacks. I also watch the car market frequently, looking at cars I can't afford, which is quite sad, but at least I'm up to date with used car prices, so my opinion is more valid. Let me introduce to you the most underrated and affordable hot hatch you can buy right now. Yes, it's the Renault Megane 250 RS. This particular model is a 2011 Megane 250 RS Cup with Stage 2 mods and tune, so it makes more power than stock. To understand why I'm about to rave on about the Megane 250 RS, I need to give you some context. I originally came from a Honda S2000 AP1, which I regretfully sold many years back, so my expectations on performance cars are already extremely high. When I started searching, I set strict conditions which included a vehicle that was manual only, small in size but preferably 2 doors, easy to complete maintenance on without a mechanic, somewhat track focused, and it must be turbocharged this time around, hence why hot hatches came to mind. I set a 25k budget which needed to cover the vehicle, all on-road costs, and any modifications or maintenance to ensure that the car was reliable throughout my ownership. I originally had my heart set on the Hyundai i30N, so I managed to book a test drive for 8 hours, and naturally I took it to the mountains and gave it a good thrashing. I knew that the i30N was a great candidate, however, good luck finding one used in Australia for under 30 grand. But personally, I wasn't too convinced that the i30 was the best option for me, considering there are cheaper turbo alternatives that could match it in handling and performance. I considered a number of other manual hot hatches which I tested and conducted research on, however nothing really gave me that wow factor in terms of performance, looks, or just generally the price. I wasn't overly confident with the reliability and availability and community support for some of those vehicles which I came across within my budget. I was very close to purchasing a Mazda 3 MPS for less than $20,000, which the owner had stated that all the common issues had been addressed, but unlucky for the owner, that same week my close friend had an MPS and their engine blew up, and he had only but negative things to say about his experience, so obviously I'm not buying a Mazda MPS. The Megane was literally on the bottom of my list because I've never owned a European car. I know in Australia, European cars are expensive to maintain, plus I've only heard bad things about French cars, especially Peugeot. But I had already exhausted all my options, so I gave the Renault Megane 250 RS Cup a test drive, and to my surprise, it performed and handled so damn well I almost bought one on the spot. It compared so closely to the Hyundai i30N, however I actually enjoyed my seat time in the Megane RS heaps more. So I started to research the Megane 250 RS and found plenty of clean, low kilometer examples selling between 15 to 22,000 in Australia. The Megane 250 RS Cup makes 250 horsepower from factory from a 4-cylinder 2-litre turbo engine, which is claimed to launch you from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in about 6.1 seconds, which is very close to the i30N figures. After testing a used Megane, I found that it was more like 6.5 seconds, which honestly I didn't really notice. The Renault Megane 265 RS Cup is also on the table if you're looking for options, with a bit more power from factory, more features, however comes at a slightly higher cost for the same engine and chassis, so I personally did not look into those. I eventually made the decision to really hone in on the 250 RS Cup to find an example that was correctly modified and tuned to match the performance of the more expensive 265 RS. I was slightly deterred by some of the common issues, however I spent weeks and weeks asking questions on groups and forums which eased most of my doubts, which I'll cover a little bit more later. So that brings me to my purchase. Although I've personally been extremely happy so far, I cannot say the Megane 250 RS is for everyone. Putting aside how well it performs and handles, the downside is that it is a European car at the end of the day. If you're Australian like me and live far away from Europe, then you'll know that European cars are fucking expensive to maintain and fix when shit goes wrong. To add more fuel to the fire, the French manufactured the Megane RS with very minimal accessibility, as they did not clearly think about the technicians who need to maintain these vehicles. So if you aim to try DIY all the mechanics, then you're going to be in for a treat. If you're not fazed by the mechanical challenge, you will save heaps of money going DIY, as the bulk of maintenance costs for this vehicle is labor, as most of the tasks on this car are overly time consuming. If you cannot go DIY, then I highly recommend finding a French car specialist, because not all mechanics know how to work on these cars, let alone price them properly. In terms of reliability of the Megane 250 RS, when maintained, the drivetrain is honestly bulletproof, especially the F4RT engine. Yes, you read that right, the engine code almost looks like it's spelled fart. How mature. Overall, there isn't many common issues to be worried about, but that really depends on how you intend to drive the vehicle, which I'll explain in a moment. Like any European car in Australia, large maintenance items can be costly, but there are so many people who own Megane RSs, there's a huge following on just rental altogether, so it's clearly not that much of an issue for the people that own them. The real issue is when you uncover an uncommon problem, because this can really break your bank account, so it's important to choose wisely when finding a used example. I personally have researched all the common and uncommon issues with this car before I purchased it. I wanted to make sure that my car wasn't plagued with problems, and to help you, I've actually uploaded that knowledge onto YouTube, so click on the link if you're interested. There's a link in the description as well. Now keep in mind, there are a number of different trim levels for the Megane RS, which offer more or less features. I would suggest to keep it basic and stick to the 250 RS Cup, as it has the least amount of features, therefore less chances of something going wrong. As stupid as that sounds, it seems to have worked for me and a few others I've spoken to, because as the vehicle ages, you start to see some of those fancy features fail first. I personally have not experienced any major problems that I've found on forums. However, that's because I don't daily drive my Megane RS. Like older European makes, they are never going to beat Japanese or Korean car reliability, so sometimes they don't make for good dailies. Renault should honestly have just advertised them as limited use vehicles, because they can take abuse in small amounts without any issues. However, in terms of daily driving, they're not so popular. Some people even use them as dedicated track cars a few times a year and never have any issues. So it's clear that I don't believe that they are an A to B car, so those who are thinking of dailying one, you probably need to reconsider or do some more research. The reason why I've concluded that daily driving the Megane RS is probably not a good idea is because when reading forums and groups, most of the people who have these common issues are daily driving them, whereas the people who don't drive them often seem to have less issues. And this statement is not in regards to the longer the vehicle's been on the road, the more issues you're going to have. It just seems that the way the vehicle gets driven, such as stop and start traffic or daily operation, versus a car that doesn't have that and just goes to the track every now and again, you're obviously going to see different types of problems, and more so less problems if you use the car infrequently. And to add to that, sometimes it doesn't matter how old the car is or how many kilometers have been put on it, because in forums I've seen cars have issues at the 45,000 kilometer mark, and that's because they daily drive that car and something has prematurely failed. Not exactly sure why, and this is a very rare case, but that's just an example. So I'm led to believe that this vehicle clearly cannot handle extreme weather conditions, such as Australia's hot weather, and it will make a lot more sense if you check out my video regarding common and uncommon issues. This is a separate topic altogether. I'm not going to get enough time to cover it. So go and check that out. Like I said before, I've left a link in the description. Now I want to stop there and put all the fears for this car aside. There are countless comments that you will find of Megane RS owners who have never ever experienced any issues throughout the life of their ownership. So don't think that these cars are riddled with problems from factory, because that's just not true. They're not a Land Rover or anything. Like I said earlier, when maintained, these are bulletproof, so complete a pre-purchase inspection, preferably done by a French car specialist, before making a decision on a used example. If you live in Melbourne, Australia, I personally suggest you go to Alpine Affair. Marty, he's an extremely helpful guy and he will help you with this stuff. To end this video on a high, I will conclude by saying the Megane 250 RS is a car like nothing else. I've driven many performance vehicles other than my S2000, and the Megane RS probably comes second as the most fun I've ever had with a car, especially when you start modifying it. Once again, if you're looking to buy a Megane RS, then don't miss out on my video that might help you avoid any lemons. So go and check that video out, and I'll leave a link in the description. I'll see you in the next one.